Have you ever felt your work environment was less we care about you, more survival of the fittest? Well, you see, a toxic work culture can drain your energy, it wrecks your confidence, and it makes you really just dread waking up for Mondays. But how do you spot this before it's too late, and what can you do about it? Well, I'm going to go ahead and break down some videos that there's some YouTubers that talk about this from around the web. And no, I don't necessarily own any of these videos, and I'm going to go ahead and give them a shout out in the description below. And just remember, these guys have a lot more followers than I do, and some of them may have good points, some of them may not. Let's get into it.
4 signs of a toxic organizational culture. Number one, top-down leadership. If leaders at all levels are much more interested in keeping control and giving commands rather than helping you do your best work, then the odds are you're in a toxic company culture. Number two, secret keeping. If people throughout the organization are hoarding information and keeping secrets from each other, then you're in a culture that is overly competitive.
I'm not sure overly competitive is the right word for that, but I have worked in an organization where the secrets are just ridiculous over the dumbest things. I work in HR, and one of the dumbest secrets that anyone ever kept from me was, hey, I need to know how I can support you with this ADA accommodation. "Oh, well, it's too complicated. You wouldn't know." And we both worked in HR. I'm like, I don't understand. All right, continue on. Good advice so far.
Number three, default to the status quo. Leaders that think the world is never going to change and that their business model and their organizational chart never changes are leaders that build a toxic culture, because the innovators and the people who want to bring their best selves to work and contribute their ideas don't feel welcome.
You know, that's funny he says that because there's a fancy word that a lot of managers and leaders like to use, and it's called collaboration. But he's so right. So many bosses and leaders have easily bruised egos that you bring something to the table, they feel threatened because it's not their idea. They know better than you, and they like you to know it. All right, let's continue on.
Pretty soon, they leave. And number four, recreational complaining. Complaining for the sake of complaining. Complaining for the fun of it. Complaining because you know that your complaints aren't being heard by anyone who has the power to change it. If you want more ideas and content like this that'll help you lead smarter and do your best work,
Yeah, recreational complaining is a problem, but if by the time your workers are getting to that point, what are we doing? Like, seriously. So far, good advice. Let's check out the next video.
If there are bad behaviors going unchecked regularly, you almost absolutely have a toxic environment because there
True.
are no
True.
consequences to bad behavior.
Absolutely true. 100% truth. I see no lies here.
And it's essentially a free-for-all. First of all, I think a toxic environment is defined in terms of how people feel. It's hard to measure. It's a feeling. It's sort of the soup that people are moving around in day to day. It's not the company's reputation, but it's how are you being treated? How do you?
One thing that I disagree here is it's just a feeling that there's no way to describe a toxic work environment. The truth is, a toxic work environment happens because there's action. Somebody, whether it's a peer or whether it's a boss, decided to do something that makes everybody feel a certain way. That kind of tension, cutting with a knife, walking on eggshells. And she goes on to say here, and she's saying, how are you being treated? How are you feeling? Um, yeah, it's not just something that happens overnight. Nobody just wakes up and says, "Man, this work environment's toxic." No, there's a lot of string of events that happen that lead to this point.
Feel how are other of your peers, your bosses, how are they treating you? How do people treat?
Yeah, and she said right here, "How are they treating you?" So I feel it's a little contradictory. I mean, this person has way more subscribers than I do, which is, good for them. But it's that feeling of, I got treated this way, and now the environment's this way. And some people take it to the extreme, some people don't. But yeah, it's not just something that manifests overnight for no reason. All right, we'll go ahead and check out another video.
So if the reason you're leaving one job is that it was toxic, is a different question than if you've left every job because it was toxic. If somebody came to me and said every job they've ever had was toxic, I would be a little bit suspicious. It's like,
I would be too if somebody told me that every job they've ever worked is toxic, because it's not the company itself that's toxic. It's usually managers that are toxic. But I would have a hard time believing that every single manager on the planet is toxic.
the only common factor in all my failed relationships is me, which is if every job you've ever been in was toxic, I'm thinking, were they though? It was just
Agreed. 100% agreed with this one. If you work in an environment and every single job you worked in is discriminatory or prejudice or whatever you want to call it, you might be the problem here. It's a hard pill to swallow, but the truth is the truth.
Signs that you may work in a toxic workplace. 1, if you negatively think about your work once you have clocked out. 2, if you cannot freely speak up in a meeting in fear of your job. 3, if your managers make you feel like that you should be starting earlier and finishing later other than your
He's
contracted
speaking kind of
hours.
fast. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I get he's trying to shove a lot of stuff here in roughly 18 seconds, but he's speaking kind of fast. So let's try this again.
Signs that you may work in a toxic workplace.
Right, I'm all for
1,
this.
if you
Let's see.
negatively think about your work once you have clocked out.
Okay. He said you feel negative about once you clocked out. Okay, sure.
2, if you cannot freely speak up in a meeting in
Okay, you can't freely speak up in meetings. Time and place on that one. Let's be honest about it. Time and place, because not every meeting is meant to be a back and forth conversation. Some meetings are just meant to be, let's put out the information and go. So let's, you know, Aaron Knightley. I mean, he's got some good stuff here, but the problem is it's a little misguided because it's not giving you, the true full picture.
I know some of you are very stressed out and you may be wondering if you work at a toxic workplace environment.
I find it interesting because this gentleman's words, his captions are underneath everything, so I really can't read what he's saying, so I'm really gonna have to pay attention.
I want to share with you the 4 most common toxic workplace environments. And let me know if one of these fits your situation. Number 1, let's talk about the bullying environment. The bullying environment is very self-explanatory. There's a lot of bullies in the workplace. And
It's interesting he says bullying is self-explanatory. The career godfather here, he's not wrong in a sense. It is kind of self-explanatory, but there's also, it kind of really depends on the state. That there is, some states have clear guidelines on what bullying is, and others it's just simply offending somebody. So
maybe your manager, it may be coworkers. But what I learned is that these environments are filled with toxic people. Number 2,
yes, that's true. If you walk in, and when you do an in-person interview, it's easier to kind of get a lay of how people are, and you can watch. If people are seeming apprehensive, or if you got like that super domineering type of interviewer that's just talking over you, or being kind of pushy about you answering questions, or heck, once you're already working in there, if you got a manager that's kind of overbearing, or people that are overbearing and bullying, they come in like a bull in a china shop.
2, the micromanagement environment. Usually the micromanagers are your managers, your team leads, your directors. I even find execs running into micromanagement.
Yeah, micromanaging. I think that goes without saying. I would agree with that.
Learn that this environment runs people away more than just about any other environment. Number 3, the toxic workplace culture. Usually toxic workplace cultures are formed by not addressing the toxic issues and people in the workplace.
He's. I appreciate him saying it's the culture, but the thing is, the culture is the culture because of things like bullying or micromanaging or unrealistic expectations. So he's not really addressing anything here with this third point, in my opinion.
To me, this is the most dangerous environment because you can be a good worker but exposed to toxic culture. And number 4 is the high stress environment. Usually
Once again, high stress environment, the toxic work culture. I mean, it's he's not. I guess his videos toxic workplace environments, but he started off with talking about actions that lead into the culture or the environment. I feel he gets a little lost when we're talking about, culture versus action, because there's a very clear difference between the two things. So he's not wrong, but I'm sure there's other factors into this. So 5 stars. Toxic workplaces are always a buzzkill, but that doesn't mean your career has to stay in one. If you found that Toxic workplaces are always a buzzkill, but that doesn't mean your career has to stay in one. If you found that this video was useful, go ahead and smash that like button, hit subscribe, comment if you want, and let's build a community where we can thrive one day at a time.